What we've really done in this episode is to help you place a "You Are Here" marker on the map of your practice. I'm going to walk you through 9 questions, and more importantly, I'll explain why each of these questions matter and how to think about your answers. Over these 9 questions, you've looked at what created momentum, what quietly drained you, where you've become the constraint, how you showed up as a leader, how patients experience your practice, what created leverage, what energy aligned and eroded, where your team revealed, and whether or not the current trajectory feels sustainable. That's not busy work. That's CEO level reflection, and it creates the fuel and the direction for what needs to be kept, what needs to be removed and modified next year. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing in Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. Now, as we come to the end of the year, I want to slow things down just a little today. I was at a shopping centre recently and I was wanting to find a Lululemon store to buy a Christmas gift. I went over to one of those big kind of directory maps. I found Lululemon right away there too and thought, great, this will be super easy. But then there was a problem. The map didn't have one of those little "You Are Here" signs on it. So even though I knew where I needed to go as well, I'd had no idea literally how to get there. And it struck me, this is what happens in practice for us a lot nowadays. Every December, we jump into planning for the new year. There's new goals, new numbers, new strategies for 2026. But we miss a really important step. We skip the most important step in many cases there too. We don't stop to clearly identify where are we right now. And the truth is, the journey is completely different depending on where you're starting from. And if you don't know where you are, even the right destination is not going to help you. So before we talk about 2026, before we talk about growth and numbers and strategies, I want to help you place a "You Are Here" marker on your practice. So today's episode is about how to do a proper end of year review, the kind that actually sets you up for a better next year instead of just a busier next year as well. I'm going to walk you through 9 questions, and more importantly, I'll explain why each of these questions matter and how to think about your answers as well. Now, you might want to pause, grab a notebook, or come back to this episode when you've got a bit of time and space. So let's jump into it. Question number 1, what actually worked this year and why? Now, why is this question important? Most chiropractors are very aware of what didn't work, but very few take the time to properly study what did. This question trains you to recognize patterns of success so you can repeat them intentionally instead of accidentally. This isn't just about effort, it's about cause and it's about effect. Now, when you answer this question well, you're looking for things that created momentum with less friction and not just things that you worked really hard on. The goal here is identifying what deserves to be carried into next year, okay? Now, you'll get most value when you review questions across a few key domains here. Rather than giving one big general answer, this time you're going to be asking, where did things feel easier, smoother, or more effective than expected? Okay, so let's start and have a look at these domains that we're going to look at. The first is marketing. What consistently brought in the right type of patients? What felt simple and what felt repeatable? Retention and communication. Where did patients stay longer? Where did they feel more engaged? And where did they require less reassurance? What about your education? What explanations, what metaphors or conversations? What landed more easily this year? What about in your staff and your leadership? Where did clarity improve performance and reduce tension? What about if we look at meetings and plannings? Did you even have any meetings and plannings? But what rhythms or structures reduced chaos and increased follow through? Systems, okay, second to last here. What worked without constant pushing or fixing? And finally, you, okay? Where did your presence, your boundaries, and your leaderships make things flow better, okay? So how might this sound in your practice? Let's look at your marketing. Perhaps there was one channel that consistently brought in higher quality new patients. What about your attention, your communication? Okay, maybe you realize that where you slowed down and you summarize clearly, the patients stayed longer and were more engaged. Your education, perhaps you started using simpler metaphors and noticed that they landed better than the detailed explanations that you used beforehand. Your staffing and leaderships, perhaps you set clear expectations, and in doing this, you notice reduced tension and less repeat conversations as well. Your meetings and plannings, perhaps your weekly planning meetings created calm and better follow through. Systems, you put together a simple onboarding checklist that saved constant re-explaining. And when it came to you, you protected your energy. The whole practice, when you did this, you noticed that it ran more smoothly. Now, before we move on here, I want you to notice something. For this first question, we looked at what worked across a few key areas of the practice: marketing, communication, leadership, systems, and you, okay? For the next question, I want you to look at those same areas, but through a completely different lens. This time, it's what went badly, or it's not really about what went badly. It's more about what quietly drained your energy, your time, your focus without giving you a return, okay? Very often, these are the things that looked fine on the surface, but made everything feel heavier than it needed to be. Now, with that in mind, let's move on to question 2, which is what didn't work and what did it cost me, okay? This question, why does it matter? If you don't name the real cost of why something didn't work, you're likely to repeat it. It's as simple as that, okay? And the cost isn't just money, it's time, it's energy, it's tension, it's emotional bandwidth there as well. This question helps you separate learning from self-criticism. Really important. You're not judging yourself, you're auditing decisions here. Now, seeing this clearly prevents you from carrying unnecessary weight into next year. So again, areas to look at when you're answering this, just like the previous question. You'll get the most value when you review this across several domains. But this time, you're looking for the drain, not the momentum. Okay, so marketing. What took time, money, or focus, but didn't bring a return of the right type of patients? Retention and communication. Where was there confusion, rushed conversations, or inconsistency that crept in? In your education, what explanations felt heavy, complex, exhausting? What things just didn't give you the result that you wanted? When we look at staff and leadership, where did a lack of clarity, that was hard for me to say, where did a lack of clarity create friction or an emotional load? What about in your meetings and your planning? What meetings or rhythms created motion without real progress? Okay, systems. What only worked when you personally pushed it? Okay, remember, a real system should work independent of you. And finally, for you, where did poor boundaries, over availability, or avoidance cost you energy? So how might this sound, or what might this look like in practice? In your marketing, it might be that you spend a lot of time and money on a channel that brought in inquiries, but not the right patients, okay? With your retention, your communication, perhaps you noticed that when you rushed visits, that it led to more follow-up questions and drop-offs. In your education, again, perhaps you realized that over-explaining left both you and the patient overwhelmed. With your staffing and your leadership, maybe one of the things that you realized is that unclear roles created tensions that lingered on well past what they ought to have, okay? Meetings and planning. Maybe you met more often, but nothing really moved forward. I hear this all the time. People are having weekly meetings, but they're a chore. Nothing is actually changing. Systems, okay? Perhaps you noticed that if you weren't involved, then the system fell apart. And again, looking at you specifically, perhaps being constantly available actually slowly drained your energy, okay? Maybe you were too available. Let's move on to question 3. Where did I personally become the bottleneck? This is important, particularly when we want to look at leadership. This is one of the most important leadership questions that you can ask. Every growing practice eventually hits this point, not because the team isn't capable, but because too much has to run through the chiropractor. This question helps you see where progress is slowed, where decision gets stacked up or momentum dropped because of how leadership is structured, okay? Not because of effort or because intention. Bottlenecks aren't so much character flaws, they're just design issues, okay? And once you see them, you can redesign them as well. So some areas for you to look at when answering this. So rather than answering this again generally, okay, look for bottlenecks in specific parts of the practice, okay? Look at decision making. What decisions waited on you that didn't need to? Delegation, okay? What stayed on your plate because it felt quicker and safer to do yourself, okay? We often fall for that. We feel this is just easier for me to do myself than for me to teach somebody else. That's a mistake. Communication. Where did your team need constant clarification and reassurance from you? In training, where did a lack of clear training force problems back to you again? Systems, what systems only worked when you personally enforced them? And then finally, emotional leadership, okay? What was the emotional tone of the practice and how did it depend entirely on you? Now, again, here's some examples of how this might look in practice. Again, if I wasn't in the building, then maybe you noticed that things slowed down. Your team waited on you to approve even the smallest of decisions. You avoided delegating because you didn't want to re-explaining things. Problems came back to you because training wasn't clear enough as well. Nothing really moved unless you drove it, okay? Or when you were stressed, the whole practice felt it. These are all examples of things or situations when it all fell too much on your shoulders. There wasn't good delegation. Let's move on to question 4. What did this year teach me about my role of clinician versus CEO? Now, here's why this question matters. Your practice is never going to outgrow how you see your role inside it. Most chiropractors are trained to think like clinicians, but very few are trained to think like CEOs. And yet, practice growth, time freedom, and sustainability all live on the CEO side of the equation. This question helps you step back and honestly assess how you showed up this year, not how hard you worked, but where your attention actually went. And until you find the gap between clinician work and CEO work, it's very, very hard to close it. So some areas to look at when answering this, rather again than answering it emotionally, look at where your time, energy, and decision-making went throughout the year, okay? So let's look across these domains. Time allocation. Where did most of the week actually go? Was it in adjusting, problem solving, planning, or reacting? Okay. Decision making. Were you mostly responding to issues intentionally or were you setting direction? Planning versus firefighting. How often are you working on the practice versus in it? Okay. Most of us spend a whole bunch of time working in it and very little time working on it. Okay. What was your leadership presence like? Did the team look to you for vision and clarity, or did they look for you for just answers? Okay. Future focus. How much time did you spend thinking beyond just next week? And then finally, identity. Did you operate more like a senior employee or the owner of the business? Okay, so here's how this might sound in practice again. It might be the realization was that you spent most of the year in your business, not on it, that you only put on your CEO hat when something broke, or that when you planned ahead, you might have noticed that everything felt calmer. You realized how little time that you actually put to protect your leadership work. Clinically, you were strong, but strategically, you were inconsistent, okay? Or maybe you noticed that the practice reflected your reactivity rather than your intention. These are some of the realizations that you might start to find when you're looking at yourself from a CEO versus a clinician point of view. On to question 5 as we come towards the halfway mark or get over the halfway mark. Where did patients stay and where did they drift away? Now, why is this question important? Most chiropractors think about retention in terms of numbers, but patients don't stay because of spreadsheets. They stay because of how they felt. This question helps you move beyond surface level metrics and look at trust and clarity and leadership through the patient's eyes, okay? When practice members drift away, it's rarely because they didn't believe in chiropractic. It's usually because something felt rushed, confused, misaligned, or impersonal. And understanding where patients stayed and why gives you far more leverage than just chasing new patient volume as well, okay? So some areas to look at with this. To get real insight here, look across full patient journey rather than blaming one moment or one visit, okay? So first impressions, where did patients immediately feel welcome, prepared, and understood? Communication, where were expectations clear and where were they assumed? Education, what explanations help patients see progress and purpose? Where did visits feel calm, present, and unhurried? Again, look at your leadership and your certainty. Where did patients sense confidence and guidance from you? Again, review your systems and consistency. Where was the experience predictable and where was it variable? Again, this whole new patient experience should be predictable. The outcome that we want is to have practice members feel seen and heard, okay? And then finally, follow through. Where did you or the team close loops and where did things quietly drop off? Okay, some of the realizations that people get when they go through this is that the patients who felt heard are the ones that stayed longer, okay? When visits felt rushed, people disengaged. Clear next steps kept people anchored in care. Patients stayed when they trusted the process, not just the technique. Inconsistency between team members created confusion, and that confusion means that patients disappear. When we showed progress clearly, commitment improved. And again, drift happened when we assumed understanding instead of checking on it. This is all valuable information for you to find by asking these questions. You're doing an audit of your year here. And as you're starting to see here, this information is going to really help you plan in 2026. On to question number 6. What systems did I build that will still help me next year? Okay, now why does this question matter? This question separates growth from grind. Now, you can grow a practice by working harder, but the kind of growth like this is often fragile and exhausting. Sustainable growth comes from systems that reduce decision-making, create consistency, and work even when you're tired, when you're busy, or even when you're away on holiday. So this question helps to identify what created leverage for you this year, not just movement. If something only worked because you pushed it constantly, it's not a system, it's an effort. And effort becomes exhausting, okay? So let's look across a few different areas here. The new patient journey. What made the first visits, the report of findings, and the onboarding smoother and more predictable? Okay, have you got written systems for how the phone is answered, how the patient is greeted, okay, how they're transitioned into the report of findings, the money conversations, okay? Clinical flow, what reduced interruptions, delays, or cognitive load during the day there? What helped you be a great chiropractor and deliver great adjustments? Communication, what standardized messages, scripts, and explanations reduced confusions, okay? We want to have a menu of things that we can choose from when we're wanting to educate our practice members. Again, team training, what helped team members succeed without confusion and constant input from you. Meetings and planning, what structure created clarity and follow through week to week. Again, tracking and feedback, what gave you visibility without micromanaging? How can you, at a glance, look to see what's happening in the practice, what's growing, what's not growing, what's on track, what needs your attention? Again, personal systems, what protected your energy, your focus, and your thinking time, okay? So again, what sort of information do we get from this? We might realize that our new patient flow runs the same way every time. This is great news, particularly if it's working. Clear roles reduced interruptions throughout the day. Standard explanations save you from repeating yourself. Once training was documented, fewer things came back to you. Weekly planning created calm instead of chaos, okay? Simple tracking helped problems to be found and solved easier, okay? And protecting CEO time changed how you thought about the practice. This is the sort of information that we can get from this. Question number 7. We're getting near the end here, gang. Hang in. I know this is a little bit dry, but it's incredibly powerful. The answers that we get from this will be the difference of success and or failure in 2026. So question 7 is, where did I feel most aligned and where did I feel most frustrated in practice in 2026? Your emotions are not a distraction from good leadership. They're just data, okay? So data is wonderful information. We can take the emotion out of it. Alignment usually shows up as calm, as clarity, and a sense that things make sense. Frustration, on the other hand, is often a signal that something is out of alignment with your values, your role, or the way that your practice is designed. I really like that. We want to go hunting for frustration. I'll say that again, because frustration is often a signal that something is out of alignment with your values, with your role, and the way that your practice is designed. None of us want to feel frustrated, okay? If you ignore these signals long enough, they tend to turn into burnout, resentment, or even disengagement. This question helps you use the year as feedback, not to judge yourself, but to design next year more intentionally, okay? So some areas to look at when we're asking ourselves these questions. And again, instead of asking, what did I enjoy? Look at, where was your energy consistent? Where was it rising? Or where was it falling? Look at your clinical work, okay? When did adjusting feel energized and when did it feel heavy? When did leading your team feel natural, okay? And where's the times that you were actually trying to avoid it, okay? Schedule and pace. Where was there rhythm to support your week? And where did you find that you were worn down, okay? Where did clarity feel natural and where did indecisions linger around, okay? Boundaries. When did saying yes feel good and when did it cost you later? And of course, last but not least here, purpose and values. When did the work feel meaningful and when did it feel misaligned, okay? So the type of insights that you might get from this, okay, is that teaching and mentoring really lit you up, in which case you want to do more of it, okay? Certain conversations drain you every time. Your schedule looked good on paper, but it was unsustainable. Maybe the way you're booking patients, you like to tell yourself that you can see 3, 5, 6 across, but you're constantly running behind and you're feeling drained, okay? Maybe you felt aligned when you worked proactively and frustrated when you were being reactive. Maybe avoiding decisions created more stress than actually sitting down and making them. Perhaps you noticed that poor boundaries slowly eroded your energy and that when you worked with purpose, that everything felt lighter. Okay. Question 8. What did you learn about your team or the team that you need next year? Okay. Teams are nothing more than mirrors of leadership. And most frustrations that chiropractors experience with their team aren't about effort or attitude. They're about clarity, structure, and support. This question helps you move beyond blaming people, and instead it'll help you examine how the practice is set up for success or alternatively for struggle. It also helps you separate who is on the team from what the team needs, which is a critical distinction as the practice grows, okay? So rather than focusing on personality, let's look at some patterns here. Let's look at roles and expectations. Were the responsibilities clear and where were they assumed? Okay, this is really important, okay? Training and onboarding. Where did training set people up to win and where did it fall short? Accountability. Where was follow through consistent and where was it vague? Okay. Without accountability, there is no success and follow through. Communication. Where did information flow smoothly and where was there a bottleneck? Ownership. Where did team members actually step up and where did things default back to you? Capacity. Where was the team stretched too thin and where were they underutilized? Future needs. What kind of support will the next version of the practice require? Okay. Here's some things you might learn from this. When expectations are clear, the team performs really well. Surprise, surprise. Most issues came from unclear roles, not a lack of effort. Okay, this is another obvious one that chiropractors oversee all the time. Better training reduces repeated mistakes, and avoiding feedback created more tension than having the conversation. Okay, perhaps you may realize that ownership increased when accountability was consistent. Maybe you realized that you didn't have a people problem, that you had a clarity problem. Okay, this is something that I notice with community influencer members all the time. You don't have a person problem. It's not that that's a wrong staff member. What you have is a clarity problem. And then again, maybe the realization is that the team that we have now is not the team that we need next year. All right, question 9, our final one here is if next year looked exactly like this year, how would you feel? Okay. This is a truth-telling question. It's not a planning question. It's not a strategy question. It's a truth question, okay? Because before you change your numbers, your systems, or your goals, it's worth sitting with the emotional reality of the trajectory that you're currently on. This question bypasses rationalization and goes straight to intuition. How you feel when you imagine another year just like this one is one of the clearest indicators of whether your current direction is sustainable or not. So don't rush this, okay? Let the honest response, the first honest response, really surface. Look at your energy. Okay, would you feel energized or would you feel quietly depleted if next year was the same as this year? Would your time feel protected or constantly stretched? Would you still enjoy your work day today, or would it feel like a struggle? Okay. Would you feel proud of the impact and the difference that you're making or not? Would your practice give you more options or fewer? Would this trajectory feel intentional or would it feel accidental? Or would this version of the practice support the life that you want? Okay. So again, what might you get from answering these questions? You might realize that you feel grateful, but tired, financially fine, but time poor, or proud of the impact, but frustrated of the pace. You might be relieved in some areas and constrained in others. You might feel safe, but not excited, or comfortable, but aware that you're capable of more. So let's bring this all home. Let's land this plane, because if you zoom out, what we've really done in this episode, and I know it's been a heavy one, is to help you place a "you are here" marker on the map of your practice. Before setting goals, before planning 2026, before deciding what to add, change, or fix, because direction only becomes obvious once location is clear. Over these 9 questions, you've looked at what created momentum, what quietly drained you, where you've become the constraint, how you showed up as a leader, how patients experience your practice, what created leverage, what energy aligned and eroded, where your team revealed as well, and whether or not the current trajectory feels sustainable. That's not busy work. That's CEO level reflection, okay? And it creates the fuel and the direction for what needs to be kept, what needs to be removed and modified next year, okay? So here's your key takeaways. If you remember nothing else from this episode, remember this. Growth without review usually leads to repetition, not progress. Effort is not the same as leverage, and bottlenecks are design issues, not personal failures, okay? Retention is built on trust and clarity, not pressure, and your energy and emotions are data, not distractions. Brutal honesty paired with grounded optimism is really what leadership is all about. So here's what to do next. Here's what I want to encourage you to do, okay? First of all, don't rush this. Pick one quiet hour, no phone, no interruptions, and work through these questions properly, okay? Second, write down your answers. Thinking feels productivity, okay? Writing creates clarity. We want clarity in this situation, okay? And third, circle just 3 things. One thing to double down on, one thing to simplify and stop, and one thing to redesign. And that's it. Not 10 goals for next year, not a massive plan, but just 3 clear insights. And from there, planning for 2026 becomes much simpler and far calmer as well. Now, if you've ever struggled to put together a clear plan, it's rarely because you're not capable, but more often it's because this phase was skipped. Not enough people talk about the review when they're talking about planning. When you don't slow down to review properly, planning feels heavy, it feels forced, and very often it feels unclear. Now, when you do this work first, the plan almost writes itself, and that's where we'll go next. All right, folks, as always, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I'll see you back here next week. Thanks. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.